Welcome back to one of my favorite conferences of the year that gathers people who really want to figure out how to improve their health. And each year that I'm invited, I am thankful and I seek to build on what I've done in the past. So I'll start by saying, yes, I'm an internal medicine physician, I'm an author. I do love to teach you through the storytelling, and I use that in my exam room as well as on my YouTube channel. That I have some disclosures that I do have books for sale, I have products for sale, I have some biohacking tests for sale. And I would have used them in this patient when I met her many years ago, who presented to my office saying, "Dr. Boz, I can't lose weight. I am 62 years old, and I've been in menopause for several years, putting on that 4 to 5 pounds a year." Looking back on her chart, you can see the weight gain started subtly, just a little bit, and then now, about 8 years later, that body mass index has hit the red zone. She is officially overweight, and although defensive, she says, "But my job, I'm doing everything right. My job is an exercise trainer. I work out 4 to 6 times a day, and yet I still cannot lose weight." So we're going to use this example to tell you a story about weight loss and why you might want to care about some deeper layers to why people can't lose weight. When we look at her chart, yes, her problem has acquired over the last several years. It has been more dramatic since menopause. And when I look at the first blood test, I'm going to try and understand what's happening inside her cells, what's happening inside her body. And we're going to start with the hemoglobin A1C. If you were here a couple of years ago, I used this lab to teach you more about how cells age and what this lab test does to help me get inside that blood cell, that red blood cell. It's this structure, this purple string of protein called globin that winds around by the millions inside your body, and it holds on to those yellow cups called heme. This is hemoglobin, and the job of hemoglobin is to carry these 4 molecules of oxygen to your body. When this job is done correctly, the hemoglobin shifts its carrying, dumps off the oxygen, and cycles back to your lungs to be refilled again. Over and over again, these little strings of protein last about 3 months, and they really only have one major enemy. That major enemy is glucose. When glucose comes too close to that yellow cup, it will push away the oxygen and will bind to that hemoglobin, so sticky, like the gum on the bottom of your shoe, that once that glucose binds to the hemoglobin, it's there for the life of the protein. That process is called glycation. So the lab test is called glycated hemoglobin A1C. Once that glycation happens, you now have a decreased carrying capacity for oxygen, and it is the root of many problems throughout the body. As the blood sugar rises, this hemoglobin A1C rises, and your ability to deliver oxygen to all parts of the body is compromised. This hemoglobin A1C, we learned together right here on this stage 2 years ago, predicts 8 of the 10 top reasons for death in the United States. So her hemoglobin A1C was 5.7. What that means is her average blood sugar was about 117, and although not diabetic, it's given me a clue to what's going on, that this woman can't lose weight. The next blood test I would have done, this is about a decade ago, would be her lipid profile. Not only will the insurance make sure that I'm rewarded because I'm a good internal medicine physician, making sure that everybody's A1C is checked, their blood pressure is checked, and a lipid profile. The lipid profile is what I stood on this stage last year and taught you about. And we worked really hard as a group to say, let's not use the letters bad cholesterol, or just look at LDL cholesterol. It doesn't do much for understanding why she can't lose weight. Instead of using LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol, we talked about the word lipoproteins, which are really these vesicles of fat that are circulating throughout your body, and they deliver fat to other places in your body. How big they are, how buoyant they are, and how the concentration of triglycerides, well, that's really what changes their name along their lifespan. And from that information, I can start to glean what's going on inside her cells that she can't lose weight. Inside that profile of what we talked about last year, there is a time when that bad cholesterol, well, it changes. It goes from a normal lipoprotein to one that's oxidized and one that does predict the health of the patient in front of me. That has more to do with how long it was circulating than anything else, and I'm not going to learn that from a lipid profile 10 years ago. So as we look at our patient, she's got a hemoglobin A1C that's elevated. She's got high triglycerides on a lipid panel that's not too exciting in my world, but it does give me enough of a hint that something's up with her insulin. Her insulin, this is my cartoon character for Mr. Insulin. You might notice a little eye on his forehead, and that's what a healthy insulin looks like. But hers isn't healthy. Hers is inflamed. It has been in a pathologic level for years, which is in part why these two labs are abnormal. Now, I could have sent her out the door saying, we've got a problem with insulin. Let's try to change your diet. Let's try to count more calories. She's already exercising as far as we can possibly get her to exercise. And when we looked at other reasons why she might not be doing well, her metabolic panel was normal, her thyroid studies didn't give me anything significant that I could help her with. So we moved on, and I checked one more lab in her metabolic profile. This is what the lab looks like. And although most of you in the room won't recognize the sight of this, you will all know the smell of this. This molecule is in charge of removing nitrogen from our body. It, along with several other molecules, but this one does the workhorse. It is the major one for removing nitrogen from our system. And nitrogen is a measurement of waste. That nitrogen should come in through things that we eat or when we're building up muscle or tissue in our body. And when that tissue needs to be replaced, we must get rid of it. The removal of nitrogen happens through these little crystals, or the molecule can become this crystal, is a better way to say that. And on my cartoon characters, you're going to see them looking like these pink, beautiful, spiky, very painful crystals called uric acid. So let's take a closer look at why I was so curious about this woman's uric acid being elevated and what I should help her with in discovering a way that I could explain her weight loss problems. Because in the history of looking at our uric acid, we're going to go back a ways. We're going to go back to a time where our globe was filled with primates that had a uric acid of 1 to 2. And during that time, they would have plenty of their diet filled with fructose. The fructose would come in and they would use it as energy, but they had a very difficult time converting that energy into a storage form of fat. And then the world changed. The world changed with a major shift in temperature, that the access to food was very dismal, and only a few of the people in the lineage lived through that. They were strange. They had a uricase mutation in their systems. Everybody without the uricase mutation did not have enough fat on their bodies, and they died. And the only beings that went forth at that point had uricase mutations, and it did something very curious. That fructose that they would consume now could be converted to fat. Much like a camel can put a mound of fat on his back, this depositing of fat turned into a separator who could go the longest without food. And as that evolution continued, we then started to find other ways to put that fructose into our body. One of them was the mining of this gorgeously beautiful white crystal called sugarcane. And when sugarcane hit the market of our human race, we started to be able to put on that storage form of fructose even better. And then we fermented it into alcohol. And then we put camel humps on the tummies of all of our men and women in the form of a Western diet. So this evolution shows you that the uric acid throughout all of those primate evolutions has been an evolution in our systems we call healthy, around that 4.5 to 5.0 range. We look at pathology as it gets into that red zone, and using those things like sugarcane, alcohol, fructose, and the Western diet, we now have the ability, and hundreds, you could almost say thousands of studies that show when uric acid is elevated, we can predict that almost all of them have high blood pressure. Almost all of them have a fatty liver. They all have kidney disease. Obesity is in half of them. Type 2 diabetes, not just the one that a little bit of blood sugar, but type 2 diabetes is in a third of them. And if you want the highest incidence of heart disease, be sure your uric acid is elevated. This, of course, was something that I used to teach my patients is all a result of insulin. Your insulin is elevated, it's inflamed. The cellular process that it's doing inside your body, yes, your uric acid is high, but it's that insulin that's the problem. In fact, in my books of what is uric acid for, I never once considered that uric acid could be causing these problems. I said they're a symptom. This is another problem we've got, is I can measure uric acid in the form of, gout or a big toe that's inflamed. But looking at where the advancements in understanding metabolic health, I want you to join me on this discovery of what uric acid could be predicting. Could I predict and give you these problems if I just gave you uric acid? So, most of you in this room that have ever heard of the word uric acid, you probably knew someone or have someone in your sphere of influence that has had gout. And when we're looking at uric acid in the blood system, if I measured every single one of you 6 times, I checked your uric acid 6 times in the next 12 hours, I would see that uric acid would start out at that 5 level at where you're at. But as you moved nitrogen, as you moved waste product out the door of your kidney, you would see that uric acid rise, and then as it would deposit out into your urine, it would fall again. That when we look carefully where these processes are very critical, we have a superpower in our body where the glomerulus, this special unit of the kidney, takes uric acid, and in that spot where urine is made, where nitrogen is transferred into the waste system, we are great at this. We are very efficient at this, as long as we're not overweight, as long as there's no pathology. And if you're in this room, at least all the people I've talked to, we've all had a few moments of pathology in our life. So, as we look at uric acid in our systems, if the uric acid that we're measuring in your system went up too high, your kidney would do its best to shuffle it out into the urine, but it also has another backup mechanism where it will slip that uric acid outside the circulation and deposit it into your system. Once those deposits happen, you will find it to collect friends, and we call those crystals. Those crystals, well, they're very painful to move, but they are also not going to be a problem. It's a very efficient storage model for that nitrogen that should have ended up in the toilet, but you had too much, your kidney couldn't handle it. So this is the backup system. And your body will say, don't worry, I'll keep this in storage for you until you need it. that if you had heard of the word uric acid before this talk, you probably saw this in your friends, or hopefully it wasn't in your toe, because it's a very painful process. It will take grown men to crying children. This is a very painful process. I love you, husband. And if your wife is an internist, you'll want to prove that it's uric acid by putting a needle in that toe and then just looking at it under the microscope. Yes, honey, it's gout. I'm sure of it now. And the treatment for that is to listen to your wife. And those teaching points that my husband has offered, advanced knowledge for his wife, he took one for the team. In our patient, though, she's never had gout. She doesn't even know why I checked uric acid. She had to go look it up. Why would you care? And I bring to her attention, well, let's look at why it's high, because yours is high. It shouldn't be as high as it is. And I think it's contributing. I didn't quite use the word causing at that time, but it could be causing her weight gain. So the first thing we tackle is the easiest one. Do you drink beer? And she says, Doc, I've been in recovery for 30 years. I've been sober for 30 years, not had a drip of alcohol. So that makes that one easy for this case. The next part of the puzzle was to look at purines. Purines are part of a DNA structure that you might remember from the 6th grade. If your 6th grade teacher did what mine did, she had you do this matching game with cytosine, thymine, guanine, and adenine, and you had to match up that a purine matches with a pyrimidine, and this is what Watson and Crick got to discover in 1950, and this is why 6th grade math is a little boring, but is monumental if you can remember it when you're 52 teaching about purines. When you look at purines, the key to remember is it's the workhorse. It has those base nitrogen components, and when you look at the structure of purines, we know that you make uric acid out of some of those nitrogen molecules, and you put that in the right places, which means the kidney and out the back door, no problem. But if you happen to store it anywhere in your body, it's triggering something that you don't want if you want longevity and health. When we look at the biggest blame for purines in my world over the last 3 months, it's that it's caused by sardines. Sardines do indeed have a high amount of purine per bite. And when you look at the source of purines, we have an extrinsic source, meaning we swallow them, and that will contribute to an intrinsic source, which is what you did with that purine once you swallowed it, but also what your body has done to make tissue, to make mass. So as much as sardines might have a high ranking for a place of purines, so does your peanut butter and jelly. And when you look at the volume of mass that you have consumed and what that purine load did in the volume of your body, it likely contributed to an increase in mass. At least I've known people to overeat peanut butter and jelly, but I have a tough time finding people who overeat sardines. Inside that cellular turnover, though, is this intrinsic production of purines. And when you're growing the body, that purine is in play. But if you try to lose that mass, you now need to get the nitrogen out the door without causing any problems. All right, so those uric acid crystals and the history of that should bring you to the page where we are with our patient. And she's struggling. She has had this smelly uric acid molecule higher in her labs now for 3 years, and her weight isn't going in the right direction. Her weight loss is a struggle, not just because of her A1C and her lipids, but that uric acid has done the damage. As we try and figure out what could be causing it, we'll crisscross on the alcohol. She really doesn't have a high purine diet. She's got a very low volume of food going in. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of volume going out either. Her body mass has been stable. And so there's nothing like the demon of fructose. So we interview her for fructose. Most commonly found, well, fruit, but high fructose corn syrup is actually a much higher place from this. And she assures me that the state of California no longer allows that in their borders. She has none. But I remind her that there are some other places your body gets fructose. Honey is 75% fructose. And when I see people saying, I'm going for the natural effect of honey, I remind them that's what bears do as well, to store the fructose as fat, because it is a wonderful, 75% of that honey is fructose. Most people don't have honey. They have white stuff called sugar. It is a disaccharide made up of glucose and fructose. You divide those two into the units of a single sugar, and when glucose is burned in your body, and everybody at this conference likely knows that is a lovely unit of energy. It lasts a couple of hours, it turns into ATP, and you're done. If that's the only fuel you ever burn in your mitochondria, we find that your mitochondria isn't very healthy. We want other things burned through that. But if you used fructose as your source of energy through the mitochondria, well, it's not as robust as glucose. It's about 2/3 the amount of energy. So we call it ADP, a little less energy. But more importantly, what's downstream of fructose is uric acid. This stored energy of nitrogen that you couldn't quite get out of the body, and if I ever need to activate and use it, well, there's not much use for it. It's a waste product at this point. Your body said, I couldn't burn the fructose, just put it into storage, and if we can't get it out the urine system, we'll just put the crystals somewhere else. That if I want to lower that uric acid, you can get a prescription called allopurinol. That one's been around a while. We have some other ones on the market that do a more efficient job of stopping the production of uric acid. And it's only then that your blood system has a lower dose, and you can start to hopefully melt the crystals that you've stored in all of those secret places of your body. So, looking at an example of consumption of fructose, and transferring that fructose to uric acid, it is the number one predictor for people who have gout. And that transition for gaining gout and removing those crystals, it's no quick process. As I've been diving deep into this for the past year, these thousands of articles have led me to a summary page. This is the punchline that happens when fructose is entered into your system, and it is an exact match of what happens when uric acid is in the system. They have increased hunger. They have increased foraging behavior, much like the bear right before hibernation. They will keep eating, even if they're not hungry. The increased food intake goes hand in hand with that behavior, and the fat accumulation is a chemical mandate. Once that's there, and you don't need the energy, your body will turn it into uric acid. The oxidative stress and the damage done on our organs, any place the fructose and that uric acid touches, is documented in almost every one of those papers. The glycogen storage inside your muscle or your liver, also very high. These patients have increased thirst. They're insulin resistant. They have high blood pressure. They retain salt inappropriately. And they have low-grade cellular inflammation on nearly every organ that we look at. This reduced oxygen need, as the last tagline here, is not healthy. This doesn't mean you're more efficient at using it. It is a form of stress to the body that ages that cell that's under that pressure. So when I was trying to find the leaders in the market, thank God for Rick Johnson and for David Perlmutter, both having a wonderful book reviewing this. And if you want the bibliography for all of those articles, you'll find almost all of them in his book. I highly recommend it if you're curious about this. I'm going to highlight two things that came out of that book because it will lead you to what we're going to do with this patient and where she really got me curious. This is an animal study. It says, yes, these mice we had some mice that we fed them just the plain water. We checked their uric acid, and it was at this level in their system. We fed them fructose, and by golly, their uric acid went up. But if I gave them water with the allopurinol and fructose, their uric acid went down. The drug works, yes, it prevents you from making uric acid. What's curious is that if I watched the triglyceride production on those with fructose, it was twice, almost 3 times as high when there was just fructose. If I added the allopurinol, I prevented that. When you look at the weight gain in the mice, it was also that way. And when you look at the blood pressure was prevented from going high, but not an equal 1-to-1. If we transition this to humans, there's a whole bunch of studies out there. This one has a lot of $5 words in the title with asymptomatic and hyperuricemic and comorbidities and cardiometabolic disease. What they're really trying to say is these people had high uric acid. We followed them for 5 years. They did not have symptoms. Much like my patient who actually would not qualify for this study, what they were trying to do is say, could we look at uric acid before any of these other problems and predict the problems based on the uric acid? The study started in 2004, and they were lean. And now we look at them in 2005. They were the ages of most of you in this room. And as we look at how you got thrown out of the study, if you had high blood pressure at the beginning, we don't want you. Diabetes, we don't want you. High triglycerides, we don't want you. If your kidneys were messy, we didn't want you. If you were overweight or obese, didn't want you. And if you were on one of those medications to lower it. They separated the men and women. They had plenty of both. Here's the punchline. The higher the uric acid, as time went on, the better we could predict the high blood pressure. The incidence of high blood pressure directly correlated with how their uric acid changed. So did the incidence of diabetes, as did their triglycerides or other dyslipidemia. Their weight also was a correlation, as was their kidney disease. I think weight's the last one. The punchline is to say the studies are out there. They're very good studies, and it is a leading predictor that uric acid might be this trigger causing her to lose weight. So as I'm looking for a source of her uric acid, I crisscross on the alcohol, the purines, and she assures me she has no fructose in her diet and she has no high fructose corn syrup due to her zip code, she says. So I'm stumped. How could she be getting fructose in her body if she's not, or could she be getting uric acid in her body if these 3 sources are absent? And that's where, well, I would like to be able to say that Rick Johnson reminded me of this process by reading his book, but I swear to God, I don't think I ever learned it. I did go back to my 1998 physiology book, and there is one paragraph of this statement. It is the statement of something called a polyol pathway, something I would have glanced over and said, is it going to be on the test, and then moved on. It takes glucose and it converts it into sorbitol. Some of you might know that as one of the substitute sugars. I do not recommend this sugar because it is a direct correlation to increasing that glucose, but more often the fructose if you're in a high insulin state. Taking glucose and making fructose was something I didn't realize the body did. When you look at this physiology process, it says, well, the only place that happens is in severe diabetics. Their blood sugars are very high, the blood sugars come into the circulation, and that system says, we can't handle the load of this high glucose. Not only is it glycating the hemoglobin, the insulin's on overload and cannot do any more, so let's help out the body by transferring some of those glucose into fructose. And of course, what happens at that point is the exit system to get the nitrogen out of the waste, to lower the blood sugar a little further, and to let that patient suffer with uric acid. However, in the studies from Rick Johnson, who is a nephrologist studying the kidney, he was the first one to bring up, why is this happening? And could we make the body, or is the body making fructose at other times? And in his book, he goes through, yes, it's doing it whenever it's under high stress. That included the high glucose, but also times of sleep apnea, where the blood supply might be impaired a little bit, where the oxygen was low, they were dehydrated. And then anytime that uric acid was high, fructose was made more often through the polyol pathway. Well, this was very unsettling to me because I wanted to know what blood sugar would turn on this polyol pathway. I'm a big proponent of my patients learning that blood sugar, putting in a continuous glucose monitor, studying how high the glucose goes after they eat. And when it's high, hopefully learning that that food shouldn't be on your menu. Your wife can have it, your husband can have it. You should not. It's making your blood sugars go too high. Your own biohacking is important. What I was very unsettled to see is that you can turn this on with as low as 120 milligrams of blood sugar. That is so unfair. That is so unfair. For anybody who's ever worn a CGM, I mean, you can smell bread and have 120. You can come to an event like this and lay awake thinking about your talk and wondering if you're going to do everything I hope to have in mind in 45 minutes or less, and your blood sugar is 98 this morning when you wake up. That sleep, that stress, that life that we live, it's not hard to get to 120. It means I'm going to have to eat sardines the rest of my life if I'm going to keep that. And although my patient had not worn a CGM, she really was dedicated to her health. But when we looked at her blood sugar, it went above 120 all the time. Remember, her average was 117, so essentially her polyol pathway was turned on the whole time. And it wasn't so much that, well, I was worried about her weight. That's important to her. But what I like to do is to prevent the problems she doesn't even know are coming her way. And unfortunately, the places where your body will tuck these uric acid crystals, they include the following. That plaque inside the coronary artery that is building up those lipoproteins that have been oxidized, well, it also collects uric acid crystals. The biopsies that Rick Johnson and his team have done when looking at kidneys that age, when you put that specialized glass on the microscope, you can see crystals in the biopsy. They're uric acid crystals. What's even more unsettling is that for years we knew that there were processes within the brain that were causing Alzheimer's, that those tau proteins, the plaques that are linked to Alzheimer's and the dementia cases that are heartbreaking to watch in person, well, they were linked to fructose. But that's crazy because fructose can't get over the blood-brain barrier. So for many years, the discussion of how do you explain this to a patient that fructose on the other side of the blood-brain barrier, there's no transporter that lifts the fructose over it. It doesn't exist. That's not how we work. So how the heck did it get in there? And the most ridiculous idea, but I said this to patients, was, well, you must have a leaky blood-brain barrier. Which is really ridiculous, because the size of the molecule of fructose is huge. You should never have that leaky of a blood-brain barrier. It's nearly impossible. That's awful. And instead, what was happening is that your activation of the polyol pathway was whenever that blood sugar got above 120, you have an equilibrium set for how high is the sugar within your brain. And it also is triggered at 120. Those tau proteins, when you biopsy them, are filled with uric acid crystals. And finally, there is evidence of in the muscular wall of hearts. I'm not just talking the arteries. I'm saying as your heart is contracting, it's got some stored waste product inside that muscle tissue. So when I look at this woman saying, what are we going to do to help you get your uric acid less? Yes, the dietary purines were something I would have mentioned. But when you look at the power of what that purine is going to do for her overall health, I'll give her a couple little points for, yes, sardines have purines in them. That improvement in her body mass will be remarkable if that was the only thing in her diet. When she's coming in with a body mass index that is in the red zone, she's obese. And now I'm going to ask her to hit autophagy, to remove the body waste, to take those purines, and as they exit from her body, her weight should normalize. But she's going to have to pee out that uric acid. They're going to have to move. And I'm not going to stop her from doing that either. When we look at the other two sources and their impact on the amount of uric acid in the body, for heaven's sakes, husband, Those cotton candy grapes definitely are correlating to your gout attack that didn't happen for a dozen years and over the last 6 months have happened 3 times. That fructose that is found inside such things as cotton candy grapes, well, it's evil. Fruit is evil now, especially anything that tastes that good. And that fructose is a direct correlation to increasing his uric acid and stimulating more crystals to be in his big toe or his wrist or his knee. But most importantly, that consumption of glucose and the constant level of glucose is where I want this patient to focus. That if she does not lower her blood glucose, she will never get that weight to come off and stay off. The signal to store fat is so much louder than the rest of the processes that she's trying that her 5 to 6 exercise classes a day are not doing it. Her A1C does need to come down. Her lipid profile will need to improve. But we also have an obligation to watch what that average blood sugar is, and every time it peaks, she's making more uric acid crystals. It is through that polyol pathway that we do that. This is not a theory. You have great evidence inside the book from Dr. Johnson that you can see those articles cited. And it was with my greatest pleasure that I had hoped to come to this stage and say, you can check your uric acid. There's a point of care test. You do not need to stop at my office and do this. I don't want to see you for this. And 2 weeks ago, the FDA banned them from being sold. Yeah, that was very unsettling. It is a growing trend that if you are about to manufacture anything that pricks the skin and does have a measurement of a biohack, there's some very important paperwork you need. None of the uric acid people who make uric acid strips have that piece of paper. The only way you can get a uric acid strip is to get a prescription from me, except the prescription, nobody makes a prescription strength uric acid strip. They all made them direct to consumer. So that one is off the list. We cannot do that. So what is the next best option? And I do say it is a continuous glucose monitor. That your understanding of your own health, it can't be underestimated what you learn, even if you only wear one for 10 days. Those continuous glucose monitors should be direct to consumer within the next year. We don't have a whisper on how expensive they'll be. Our clinic does try to help you get them with a prescription without being seen, and we do follow all the rules, so hang in there. The clicks aren't that many. But if you'd like to get one of the free 50 continuous glucose monitors that we will be gifting the folks, see me at my book signing tomorrow at 10 a.m., and the first 50 people get a CGM. Thank you. Are there any questions? I actually don't know if there's a microphone for questions. There's really bright lights up here. Oh, there is. Yeah, I see it now. So I'll wait for a couple minutes for anybody with questions, because this is a good topic, and the last 3 lives on my YouTube channel, I've tried to unpack some of the nuances. Well, Greg, it's nice to see you.
It is wonderful to see you. And I want to say it's not a question, but it's a severe thank you. A lot of you don't know, but I did a 13-day sardine challenge. And in true exposure, I lost 22 pounds in that 13 days because I was 212 pounds coming to this event, and I was 195 last year. I contacted this wonderful woman, and I said, I'm a fraud, and I need help. And she said, I will see you at Hack Your Health without your big gut after you've eaten sardines. And it worked. There is a downside. I got a kidney stone.
Amen. Oof, yes.
But she said, it's a good thing because you are dumping. And I broke a crystal off from a kidney stone in a 54-year-old plumbing system that it's finding its way out as slowly as it can.
Amen. Well, Greg, your story is super common, and I'm thankful that you've told it outwardly on your channel, and I highly encourage you to stop by the RV Carnivore. Not only is he a great personality to spend time with, but his story is true. I call this personality ass over apricot. When you tell them to do something, they just tumble into it. And indeed, that is a great way to deal with food addictions, bad habits that have slipped in. And as he shifted that chemistry into an extreme ketogenic state, it does a lot of good things. The exit system for getting uric acid out is also it's got some dings in it, so he had a consequence there. It is awful. I don't wish that on anybody. I do pray when everybody, especially whenever this is happening to my husband. I've never had a gout attack, but I have had pillow talk with somebody who does. And that process is you pray that the crystals melt from the outside in and that they don't break off at the neck and tumble down the ureter, because it's a heck of a pain. But yes.
So you were 100% right. And just so everybody knows, my GKI got down to a 1.3.
Wow, that's so awesome.
0.3 below that, I have to be under a doctor's care, so it works. So thank you, doctor.
Absolutely. Thanks for your support.
Great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a contribution to uric acid from high omega-6 ratios?
It's not usually so if you
or
go
to the pain, inflammation of gout from that, or?
You know, I haven't read anything about that specifically. There's a lot of studies out there that are more anecdotal than we'd like them to be as far as what the consumption is for the patients. And it is actually one of the things that is very unsettling about the strict you should not have, and then there's these top 5 things that have purines in them. And of course, fishy food is one of them, little bitty fish. And of course, there's omega-6 and omega-3 in that fish. The ratio of those is usually where we look for what is the inflammatory process. I would contend that looking more at the patient's spectrum of how often they hit ketosis. In my practice, when somebody's saying, can I have beef? Can I, it's got omega-6s in it, and that's this terrible fat. I'm like, well, first of all, yes, what else are you putting in with the beef? And if you're looking for the inflammatory processes, it is the ratio of how much of that animal-sourced protein, even the omega-6, are you putting in with the processed list. And when that whole food animal product is highest, and there is a sprinkle, if none, of the processed food, I find the inflammatory rates to be much lower, and to be a way to remove that uric acid the fastest. Did I answer that?
Close enough.
Okay. It's a complex question. I could go through some labs, but that's going to be a little harder to do at this moment. So.
Wow, so I'm a functional nutritionist, and you're describing a client that I've been struggling with for a long time. So I want to just get this straight, because she's had such a difficult time getting into ketosis, and her blood sugars are still like hundreds, lost no weight over the last year. She had a gout attack after being on low carb and ketogenic for 6 months, and then she's been on alpurinol. So I'm curious, is taking alpurinol okay to get it down, and what do you recommend with that? And then right. I just recommended sardines to her and wanted her to do them daily, but she's like, I'm going to get sick of them.
Well, so again, when you look at that exit strategy for getting uric acid out of the body, that's what you're really trying to influence. Personally, so let's first start. You did the right thing when they're having a gout attack. For heaven's sakes, don't add allopurinol. Allopurinol will exacerbate a current gout attack, and so we wait till that attack is over, and then we stop the fructose from converting. That I think is one of the key components to how do we get ahead of this problem. That the affinity for allopurinol to that receptor is pretty good. Febuxostat is amazing, though. So when you're looking at the power behind how quickly can I impact somebody's stuck weight process, you're going to need like 9 months of allopurinol to get a decrease in that total body uric acid to the point where fat cells are listening to a new signal. So I'm a rip the Band-Aid off kind of quick gal. I would say I would get you up to a febuxostat daily, the 20 milligrams daily, because you're going to lower it so much quicker. I would also really clean up her consumption. Like, you know, you can hear Greg's story and say, oh, we don't want to do that. But what he was able to do is he has identified that the pleasure from food had won. That food wasn't a nourishing component. It was this is where he went for happy time, and as do all of us. It's part of life. But when it's the only place they're getting pleasure, and you're trying to help them lose weight, you're stuck. So I would really recommend saying we need to, you know, call it detoxify, whatever you want, but stick to sardines for 72 hours and watch what happens. That in a person who already has a uric acid history, I would have them on febuxostat for a month before I did that. I have a few clients where, you know, they're on my team, they are at stuck weights, and when we add febuxostat, nothing happens for the first month. But strangely, life gets a lot better in the fat zone, in their weights, BMI, at about 6 weeks. So it isn't immediately. You've got to lower the total body uric acid to get to that point. And these people are pricking their finger, checking ketones and glucose every day. So I know what their ketogenic state is, but there is a signal holding on to the fat cells in their body, and it does take a hot minute to make that effect.
Can you say that second? It's like a medication that you're describing?
Yes. Look at the word February, so F-E-B with a U. Febuxostat is it's like there's another name for it, I can't remember, but that's the generic name. And it's just, like, I think it's 30 times as powerful as allopurinol. It's just much more, it's the same spot that it binds, but it's just a much tighter binding for preventing the production of uric acid. So it's just better with lower, even if they skip a dose, you're still covered. Unlike allopurinol, when they skip a dose, you could have a flare. Mm-hmm.
Hi. First of all, thank you for all of your videos, and I'm a huge fan. They're super easy to understand, so I appreciate that. Okay, so I have a question about CGMs. So I started wearing one consistently for about 1 to 2 months. I'm learning how to interpret what I'm seeing. And just at lunch, I thought I was doing good when I didn't, well, I failed to plan. So I went to a restaurant and I ate avocado, egg, and beef, and I skipped the tortilla. My glucose shot up to like 190, which I've never hit before. So what is your theory on what that means? Do I have a broken CGM or did I just, and how do I recover from this?
Right, so great job on studying yourself. That's step one. The other part that I think is very interesting is to watch, Levels has been offering CGMs and studying the glucoses for a while, and it's that spike, it's that volatility in the glucoses that is the biggest predictor of not just uric acid, but of metabolic disease. Mm-hmm. So you're right to notice that. You're right to say, I don't want that. And in looking at places where, I'll tell you, I had one of the highest blood sugars I've seen. I had a 225.
Wow.
When I had like 12 of those dang cotton candy grapes. Anyway, I don't know, it was awful. But the spike is what's the incredible for predicting illness. So I would actually trust a spike in a CGM pretty tall. What I look at for do you need to be calibrated is the CGM doesn't move at all. That's a signal. And then morning fastings, I really have people double check. We want that nadir to be something we trust. And what it's doing overnight is one of the biggest predictors of metabolic health. Okay. It's probably where I see the wool on the eyes pulled back the quickest is what did it do when you slept? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it was broken. I do find many things end up in a sauce to taste great, even if it's beef, even if it's, so I don't know if your beef had some sauce on it, but...
Yeah, it was definitely seasoned with something. I don't know what. But
well,
yeah, I
wasn't
wasn't expecting that. Terry Black's is fine, by the way, guys. Did not go over 100, but next door,
yeah.
wow. Mm-hmm. Super crazy.
Yeah, so,
yeah. Okay.
But good example.
And recovery?
So hold on, tell me the recovery question again.
How do I recover from such a high spike? Should I just go walk around right now?
So yes, when you're using a CGM, one of the key things that you'll notice is as you move your muscles, you will mobilize glycogen. And patients will write in saying, "It made my sugar go up, I'm not going to move." I'm like, no, that's not the right answer. You want the turnover of glycogen to be something that's happening daily. In fact, there's a great study out there that says people who did 1 hour workout a day while wearing a CGM versus they worked out the same number of minutes, but it was 3 minutes at the end of or at the beginning of every hour, and it was something like a 20-point average decrease in their average glucose.
Oh, awesome.
And it had everything to do with how quickly they were moving glucose from its storage spot. So when you look at recovery, you have grace for yourself. That sometimes it was all about the learning, and maybe your life is always meant to be an example to others. I've often thought that. That the key would be long-term, find a way to move throughout the day. I actually just bought a standing desk, or a treadmill to go under my desk because of that study that said if you move more often. I'm like, oh, that's a great hack. I'm going to study my average glucose while using a walking treadmill while doing this and that and seeing patients. What the heck? Anyway, so
Thank you.
the movement of glucose is what you
Okay,
care
I'm
about
going to
there.
go for a jog now.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is kind of piggyback off of that. So I like to work out, and I have 2 small children at home. I get from 5 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. to work out. I work at a desk at home. But when you work out, you spike your blood sugar, right? And then I'm trying to lose weight, but then your blood sugar, you don't want to go over that, what was it, 120, right, that you talked about. So how do you lose weight at the same time of working out? How does that balance? Because in my head, it doesn't.
Right. Well, so the key of having that continuous understanding of your blood sugar isn't that you never churn it, you never send it up. It's that it lands at a lower place than it did before. You won't see that after the first workout, but what you're doing by moving your body is emptying the glycogen, and know that the next time, as long as excess consumption isn't happening at the same time,
Right.
and I don't mean at the same moment, I mean in that season of your day, you don't have as much consumption to fill those glycogen storage. You now mobilize glucose from a different area, a different storage area to fill up the glycogen again. You'll see the sugars in the blood rise. That's not something we're going to prevent. What we care about is that the glycogen storage this time is not, 200 barrels of sugar, it's 198 barrels of sugar. And over time, that average blood sugar lowers. So stay the course, do not get anxiety over that peak, and know that you want to mobilize the glucose. You want to mobilize the glucose. That's a really important part of aging with health.
Thank you.
You bet. I can't see a timer, so I don't know if I'm over. Oh, there's somebody else there.
Hello,
Last one.
I'm Dr. Nelson Vasquez.
Nice to meet you.
We're in Texas, but I am from the other side of the other free state, opposite Central Florida.
Oh,
like
excellent,
From where
great.
you are. I saw in your talk a correlation between insulin resistance and uric acid. Which one comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, according to Dr. Johnson, it's the uric acid. That it is, the uric acid was first, the high sugars when the uric acid was present. And if you put uric acid, they do fructose to uric acid, in somebody without insulin resistance, the pathology is promoted by the presence of uric acid. It was really hard for me to wrap my head around, too, because our training didn't have anything to do with that. It was uric acid is what you need to know for gout. End of discussion. It was never a marker that the cell is being hurt. The body is aging. It is depositing in places it shouldn't be. So it's become something more that I look at, and especially for people who are really struggling with, they've been overweight for 30 years. That body is locked with
'Cause,
storage.
Not everybody that has insulin resistance is going to have a high.
Well, you know
uric
what's
acid.
interesting? I had other slides that I don't have time to show, but I have had patients when we could buy uric acid strips with like 80 checks of their uric acid. And what I have been impressed by is how much it fluctuates over time. So you know how you don't need a uric acid to diagnose gout? I use that same framework that you don't need to prove to me that your uric acid is high to use febuxostat. That when they have uric acid crystals in some of these other biopsies, in some of the tissue, I'm like, you don't need any more information than that. It shouldn't be in there. We must get it out. Lowering the uric acid through a strict ketogenic diet would be great, but it also can be augmented with drugs that block the xanthine oxidase like allopurinol.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answered it. All right. Well, thank you for your attention. I appreciate the invitation.